Aloha, hola, ho. Here we are back again with Conversations with Elders, featuring my beloved Deborah Lynn Kelley. And we just finished chapter 1 of The Garden of the Desert Rose. And in that chapter, we were introduced to the character Lenny. And this character Lenny had a very auspicious experience with her deceased or transitioned grandmother coming to her and giving her a message. And the message was guidance, you might say, so that she could take on a better sense of self-worth, unconditional love, and acceptance for herself. Because the time frame that we're in the Appalachian territory of the United States at a time when religious dogma was very, very prevalent. And the character Lenny, as well as Deborah Lynn Kelley in real life, they are in this environment where the idea of divorce was not an accepted idea. In fact, if men and women dared to divorce one another, it was not looked upon in a positive fashion. And the emotional state that your character was in at this time has to do with this prevalent feeling of being guilted and shamed for being from a divorced relationship.
And as well, me following in that pattern with 2 divorces by the time I'm 30. And so there was a lot of self-condemnation. And on top of that, my mother, bless her heart, was frightened by my spiritual gift. It wasn't common or even spoken of during the early 80s, when my gifts really were coming forth. And she would say, it was very sweet, she would say, honey, don't tell people about these visions and dreams. They'll think you're crazy. And you met my mom 6 years ago when we had our angels and guides bring us together very mysteriously on Black Mountain, a sacred land for the Cherokee, of which I have 1 drop and you have more droplets of Cherokee blood. And but before her death, literally a few days before her passing 2 years ago, she told me she woke from a kind of a half awake, half asleep, groggy state of mind. And she looked up into my eyes and very seriously said, honey, it's okay if people think you're crazy. All artists are crazy, including including how she looked upon herself. Bless her heart. And so that too was a factor. And I didn't know anyone who had my similar gifts. And so that's why I would dive. Nowadays, the word is deep dive. I would deep dive into the writings of Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, and they were my salvation. And because I would see my inner archetypes, which are all what they all wanted to show up in this personal myth, and I included them, every one. And so I love Joseph Campbell, who spoke of the hero's journey. I guess do you remember reading that, Louis? That was big for us. And so to separate my ego completely from writing this book because I had no faith in my writing. But I just placed Lenny in my inner realms and said, "Here's your chance to be a hero on this journey." And and that's how I wrote, totally from my inner realm and my heart, to help others who might be in self-condemning situations, or regret of their past, or their pain of the way their parents perhaps influenced them, or society or media, their religious philosophies, and the dogma that isn't the love that we are made of. We are made totally of love, and that to me is the center. Do you agree, Louis?
Of course, love being the divinity of grace, that is our birthright inheritance. We have every right to honor that birthright divinity and to love ourselves and to be able to accept anything and everything that comes our way. Because as more and more people are seeming to agree upon, we as souls, before we incarnate, we have chosen the parents, the siblings, the experiences that will season our souls for the journey of the heart that we're on in each lifetime. So in you feeling what you were feeling due to the influence of religious dogma, society, and just sometimes in general, people can be very cruel. They can be judgmental.
Yes.
And they will share guilt and shame that, who knows, may be coming from within them, only they are projecting it outwards onto others.
Exactly.
And you seem to be leading us down a pathway on this journey of the heart to finding how to love yourself more completely with unconditional love and grace. And we will now conclude our discussion of chapter 1 of the Garden of the Desert Rose, and we will be continuing chapter by chapter on this journey of the heart, known as the Garden of a Desert Rose. I'm going to read the quote that accompanies chapter 2, Reaching for Center. Center is not a narrow tightrope through life requiring stern effort. Center is a spacious field of consciousness where the flowering of feelings is honored. Thomas E. Crumb.
As Lenny walked Lassie, she thought about a center staying put. She had no idea what a concept like this had to do with her life. She'd taken yoga classes where thinking only of your breath was important when meditating or relaxing. Privately, she knew it would take a bulldozer to remove her runaway thoughts from inside her head. She was never able to focus on her breath for more than a few seconds. Could this be her problem and the unmovable center Granny was talking about? If it was, Lenny certainly didn't feel relaxed and centered this morning. Her life had too many unsolvable mysteries for that. When she was younger and she turned things over and over in her head like this, Granny would say, "Just let things be. You climbed on this bad feeling, now climb off." But Lenny could never seem to climb off anything. Her raging thoughts stirred up unwanted emotions, and she habitually replayed them over and over. Granny's thoughts were obviously not as wild as her own. She seemed to have an answer for everything. But Lenny's life wasn't that simple. Her emotions were like riding on the back of wild horses. She didn't control them, they controlled her. Lenny craved answers that would make the unbearable bearable. She couldn't just let things be. When life tossed her a puzzling bit of intuitive information, she felt compelled to figure out its meaning. In her mind, the spontaneity and synchronicity of every moment deserved serious, awakened attention. And she was determined to ride this mystery until it was tamed and named. Once, when Lenny was 16, she had a strange experience she couldn't quite make sense of, and Granny spoke similar words of advice. After sharing her rather odd experience, Granny scolded her about being too serious. You try so hard to understand life. You're going to miss the fun of being a child, she warned. Earlier this long ago morning, Lenny and a few friends agreed to meet at a local dinner for lunch. It was a hot August day, and Lenny had worn a miniskirt she'd just finished sewing the night before. As she'd entered the restaurant, she passed a table of 3 men. 2 looked to be the age of her father. The third looked much older, with white hair and ocean blue eyes. He smiled and nodded. Lenny returned his smile. Miss, can you come here, please? He called out. Feeling slightly embarrassed, the teenage Lenny walked toward him. I'm sorry, but I'm not your waitress, she said. But I'll be happy to find one, she responded, smiling. I know you're not my waitress, he replied, suddenly sounding defensive. Has anyone ever told you how lovely your smile is? Not since I got these hideous braces, Lenny answered. Well, not really before that either, but thank you. I didn't mean to embarrass you in front of your friends. No bother, she said as she walked toward her friends. They had all been watching her. She sat down at their table with her back toward her admirer, and they teased her unmercifully. Before long, they changed the subject, and by the time their food arrived, Lenny all forgot the overtly friendly stranger. But just as she'd finished eating the last bit of her grilled cheese sandwich, he approached their table. Initially startled by his compliments and captivated by his blue eyes, she hadn't noticed his odd attire. Much like her grandmother, he was wearing a long-sleeved shirt on a blistery hot August day. His white hair was thin on top, and his short mustache was trim and dashing. He smiled with his eyes more than his lips. In his hand, he held a paper placemat, and he handed it to Lenny. Apparently, while she'd been eating, he'd been drawing. His drawing was a rustic-looking cabin scene drawn with a ballpoint pen, probably the same pen that now peeped out of his left breast pocket. Beside the cabin was a tree with long, bare limbs. A buck deer drank from a stream in the foreground. As Lenny took the drawing, he whispered into her ear, I know something about you. You'll marry young. Never, Lenny answered. I don't even have a boyfriend, and for that matter, I'm not sure I even like boys. Her stranger just chuckled and shook his head. Well, if I do marry young, will I be happy? She asked, smiling back at him. Don't try so hard, he said with a more serious look on his face. Lenny suddenly didn't want to know any more predictions. She looked away from his intense stare and tried not to blush. Lowering her head, she noticed his hands. His fingernails were perfectly manicured. Although he was dressed like a local farmer or common laborer, it was obvious to Lenny this man was neither. He patted her shoulder. turned, and then hesitated, not sure what to say. Lenny told him she was an artist and she too loved to sketch with black ballpoint pens. I know, he said. We're a lot alike. Lenny longed to know why he seemed to see through her so clearly. For weeks, his words dangled inside her head like newly discovered puzzle pieces. Back then, she didn't know how they fit into the whole of her life. Yet, reflecting back on these memories, Lenny did marry young. She also worked hard to be happy. In fact, she was still working hard to be happy. But the key to happiness wasn't in her pocket or in her head. Maybe happiness wasn't written into her life plan. If so, did she have one? Since her friends easily overheard her stranger's words to her, they, like Lenny, assumed he was a fortune teller or a psychic. They began bombarding the poor man with questions about their own futures. He laughed and said kind words to each of them. He told one of her girlfriends she was smarter than she wanted others to think. Another friend, he said, was too honest with her words. And Lenny's poet friend, a boy new to their group, recited one of his poems to the man about life flowing generously, lovingly, wondrously, and continuously. The stranger clapped his hands, applauding the boy's brilliant writing skills. They all marveled at his knowing intuitions. When he finally left their table, Lenny rolled up his drawing and stuck it into her open pocketbook. Soon they called the waitress to their table and asked for their bill. That white-haired man paid your lunch tab, she said, swirling a piece of chewing gum around and around in her mouth. They all looked over at the table where Lenny's stranger had been sitting, but he was gone. He paid the tip and all. Y'all don't owe me a dime. Now you darlings have a nice day, the waitress said as she stacked up their plates. When she got home, Lenny told Granny the whole story, but by the time she told it, the stranger had grown into a psychic millionaire, as well as an artist who had told her they had a lot in common. I'd forgotten that part. Maybe she'd be a rich artist someday who would tell fortunes. She said to Granny excitedly. Granny told her nobody would tell the future because God gave man free will. Everything is cause and effect. It's in the Bible. You reap what you sow, she warned. Then another thought came to her, and her eyes suddenly widened. Maybe, she said in awe, the man was really an angel in disguise. Granny shook her head and laughed. She was an excellent listener. Lenny remembered their conversation ended as usual with Granny saying, "Just let it be." Today, though, Lenny wasn't about to just let Granny's visit be. She turned and walked Lassie back into her yard. As she reflected on the truth of her stranger's prediction about her marriage, she wondered if anything ever happened by chance or if a pattern or plan was already in motion from the time a person was born. How much control did Lenny have over her life, she wondered. She simply wanted to understand her granny's strange message and heed her curious advice. Lassie barked, and the sound brought Lenny's attention back to the present moment. She looked down and then up. The sunrise was hidden behind pink cotton candy clouds, and the sky was so beautiful it caught Lenny's breath. She silently thanked Lassie for shifting her focus, but the dog was caught in her own moment. Whiskers, her neighbor's golden-haired tabby, had crossed the street into their yard. The overfed cat jumped atop the hood of Lenny's Tweety Bird yellow Chevette. Lenny didn't mind. She'd bought the car used from her brother, and it was already cherished, or christened, with multiple dents. What were a few added cat prints? "Go home, Whiskers," she warned as Lassie jumped up, barking to encourage the cat's departure. As the tabby jumped off the car, she hissed at the dog. Lassie wagged her tail, thinking it was a compliment. Miss Tallulah, Lenny's next-door neighbor, was now backing out of her driveway. She and her neighbor were not on speaking terms. Miss Tallulah made it obvious she did not like children or pets invading her property. Mac walked outside and put Lassie inside their fenced-in backyard. School was within walking distance from the house, but both of Lenny's children liked Lenny to drive them in the mornings since they had to walk home after school. On the drive, Mac talked about his upcoming birthday. Lenny thought how handsome he looked as he talked. He had reddish-brown hair and pale blue eyes like his father. On Mac, this shade of blue looked less icy than it did against his father's darker complexion. Elizabeth's hair was blonde and fair like her mother's, and her eyes were a shade darker than Lenny's blue-green eyes. Lenny waited in front of the school in her car, making sure her children got into the building safely. Elizabeth turned and waved goodbye at the entrance. Max didn't give her a backward glance. Waving at one's mother wasn't cool at his age. Before starting out on her 20-minute commute from the small town of Maryville to where she worked at the University of Tennessee, Lenny pulled out a round, compact mirror from her purse. She applied lipstick and powdered her nose. The compact's mirror was broken. Spiderweb cracks radiated out from the single point of contact. Lenny accidentally stepped on the compact in high-heeled shoes. Staring into her reflection, she had a flash of insight into what her elusive center might look like. All she could see in the round mirror was her face. As her arm moved the mirror, the small circular spot that was the point of impact moved with her arm. But her face did not change because of her arm's movement. They stayed the same. She put the mirror away and prayed traffic would move as quickly as her thoughts had raced all morning. She glanced at the radio, which she turned off while talking with the children. Lenny loved music, and it seemed to help her think less and enjoy the ride to work more. If only she could learn to enjoy her ride through life. At times she had, but most of the time she had not. As she twisted the radio dial to on, Elvis was singing Blue Christmas. She joined him. It didn't cheer her, but it did make her feel less lonely. Elvis was a beautiful soul who was loved by the entire world, but deep in his eyes there was undeniable loneliness. Thinking of his blue days and also her own, she was reminded of a summer day when she rescued a bright yellow butterfly. Sitting in the kitchen, peeling and cleaning husks from a basket of corn, picked from her father's garden, Lenny saw something flash atop a nearby crepe myrtle bush. When she looked out the window to see what it was, she saw a yellow butterfly helplessly stuck to a large spider web. Lenny thought how the poor little creature had once been a caterpillar crawling on its belly. Now finally transformed, she wasn't going to stand by and watch it become a spider's dinner. She ran outside to rescue it, but the branch was too high. She hurried to the water hose and sprayed the web, releasing the beautiful creature from its prison. Although a little startled, it flew straight for the nearest blossom. Lenny knew metaphorically the image of a butterfly was often symbolic of a new beginning on a higher plane. She'd read of saints and sages experiencing transformative times of rebirth and deeper spiritual awareness. Her heart longed for such an experience, but she felt trapped mentally in a much stronger spider web. Looking out heaven's window, Granny must have witnessed Lenny's troubled state of mind. Lenny had long been able to hide her mental depression and confusion from the rest of the world, but heaven sees the unseen, even psychics. like her stranger of yesteryear, was able to see she was trapped like this little yellow insect. If Lenny's metaphoric center remained ever the same, it was the place within her where her creator resided, a being that stayed perfect just the way it was created. Thinking some aspect of herself remained ever perfect helped her feel slightly less disturbed, but it was only a thought. Could it be real? All she had centered in her life was a mess. After all, not a single friend she knew was twice divorced. She had no idea how to get the heavy sense of failure off her back. Her overactive mind was never still. The best she could hope for was the slim possibility that Granny's message was like the rushing water that set her little butterfly free. When she reached dead end thinking, unable to figure things out for herself, she often turned to books. Beneath her purse, she tucked one such helpmate, a birthday gift from her friend Dawn, The Game of Life and How to Play It. It was a magic book. It was a self-help book that included lots of quotations from the Bible, and for the first time in a long time, Lenny enjoyed reading them. Whenever Granny had quoted scripture, you knew you were in trouble. When Florence Scovel Shinn, the author of this book, quoted scripture, the same words turned into magic wands of immense power. Lenny had been reading it every night for weeks. She talked so much about it at work. Katie, one of her co-workers, wanted to borrow it over Christmas break. The book became a topic of conversation last night during happy hour, which Lenny thought wasn't really all that happy. Lenny wasn't in a dancing mood that night, but Dawn and Mitzi went crazy wild on the dance floor. They called Lenny a wallflower, but she didn't care. She wanted to be a wallflower. She had a terrible headache, and her mood, unlike Elvis's song, wasn't blue, it was gray. Blue said, I miss someone. Gray said, I'm so out of focus, I don't know who I am, where I'm going, or what I want. Lenny used to think the world was black and white. If you did this, that happened. If you didn't do this, then this happened instead. But life didn't exactly work like she once dreamed. It wasn't black and white. In between birth and death, there was a vast array of grays. Several men asked her out following her divorce, but she had declined. She'd never before feared opening her heart and entering into a new relationship. She simply followed where her heart led her to go, but that had changed. She had changed. Last night, Dawn asked her why she turned down every man who asked her to dance. She told Dawn she was afraid she'd end up agreeing to marry the guy before the darn song was even finished. You're crazy, Dawn said, giggling so hard she almost spit out her pink chablis. Right now, my thoughts are too stuck on what I should have, what I could have, and what I wish I'd not done, Lenny tried to explain. I'm constantly frustrated with myself. My body feels tired and heavy, and I feel old. I know 32 isn't really old, but I feel old. I guess because old people like to sit and relive the past, hoping somehow their thinking can change it to make it seem more acceptable. Don't be so hard on yourself, Dawn scolded. Act more like Florence tells you to act in her book. Affirm you've already met Mr. Right and give thanks you hear him knocking at your door. No, hell no, Lenny explained. That kind of thinking had dropped her into 2 emotional hurricanes. The first blush of love always felt exciting, calm, and peaceful with both men. But each time, with the ink barely dry on her marriage certificates, she discovered the full fury of frantic, possessive relationships. What part she played in creating these storms still weighed heavy on Lenny's mind. She instinctively knew she needed to examine her role in these 2 disasters before victimizing or becoming victimized ever again. Besides, something about really nice guys never appealed to her. I've always been attracted to the bad guy. Clint Eastwood type, she admitted to Don, laughing. But Lenny, Clint plays the good guy in his movies, Don had countered, laughing right back. I know, Lenny laughed, but Clint possesses a very appealing sort of bad just beneath the surface. You can see it in his eyes. That look makes him sizzle. And that's exactly what I'm afraid of attracting, except the guy I'll end up attracting really will be the bad guy type. It won't just be his natural sex appeal. Lynn sighed with a faraway look in her eyes. I think you're right about Clint. They laughed. The two friends sat in silence for what seemed a long time before Mitzi returned to their table with her dancing partner. Mitzi was petite, and her new companion looked like a giant standing next to her. Mitzi, Dawn giggled with a sly look on her face, help me push our buddy onto the dance floor. The DJ was calling everyone to dance, the Cotton-Eyed Joe. The entire bar crowded onto the dance floor for this popular line dance. Lenny didn't try to argue. Shortly into the dance, Mitzi accidentally kicked off one of her shoes. Her giant boyfriend rushed over to pick it up. A drunk accidentally kicked him in the back with his leg, and he tumbled over, knocking into two strangers plus Mitzi. They all ended up in a heap, piled on top of one another. Mitzi's underpants had been clearly visible as she fell to the floor. Lenny had sideswiped someone's cowboy boot in the
Fracas.
in the fracas and tore a large hole in her pantyhose. Everyone around them exploded in laughter. Lenny laughed again just thinking about it. Her thoughts shifted back to the present as she drove into the employee parking lot of the University of Tennessee. Lenny loved her secretarial job, and her recent transfer from the university hospital to the football office had been like a dream come true. Because she worked around a lot of boy-like men who passionately loved their career in football, she found the excitement of this competitive sport contagious and fun. She often felt she was getting paid to work and play at the same time. Arriving only a few minutes late, Lenny didn't need to start the coffee brewing. Several of the office staff had huddled around a circular table in which was considered the break room. A fresh pot of coffee was bubbling and burping in the noisy coffee maker. It was an inviting aroma, a warm and welcoming hello. And it seemed to put an end to Lenny's morning-long search for an ever-elusive center, a hidden key she'd hoped might unlock her earthly purpose, her master plan of unfolding into the best she could possibly become.
And that concludes chapter 2.
Yes.
I believe we should proceed with chapter 3, and we can discuss these 2 chapters after we finish those. How about that?
Do we have time?
I believe so.
Okay.
Well, actually, let me see here.
I think
that's the long chapter.
Yes.
So perhaps we should pause at this junction
and talk about,
and we can discuss the essence of chapter 2.
Yes.
And we'll refresh the listener's memory, reaching the center. The quote that starts the chapter reads, "Center is not a narrow tightrope through life requiring stern effort. Center is a spacious level of consciousness where the flowering of feelings is honored." Thomas E. Crum. Well, I'm wondering what you, in the wisdom that you've gained since this time in this character Lenny's life, who is, for the most part, modeled after you.
Almost 100% when it comes to the visions and dreams. And the rest came from my dream journal and journals that I kept. Every day I wrote in my journals like you do now. I don't do anymore, but um, I had all this written down, conversations with friends and how I felt. And, but I did know at least at 32 that I was repeating a pattern when it came to the opposite sex. And I didn't have a very strong, close relationship with my father. He was alive and a lovely man, but he wasn't, because of the divorce, only a weekend father and never really someone that I could share and talk to. As you are that kind of a male figure in my life, we have deep conversations because we are really a male-female mirror of each other. Now, the pattern I had then, when I met you 6 years ago, was long gone. Yet, even you and I had to make some adjustments. And no partnering is perfect. But what I find with you, which is a joy and a deep appreciation, is that we talk it out, we pray it out, we cry it out, because no matter what, we love each other dearly. And it's that love that keeps us glued in moments of crisis, whether it be finances or our 6 children and 10 grandchildren between us. We're always there for each other. And that is, in this time of pandemic, I'm so grateful to have a partner like you in my life. And perhaps I got here with the advice of the game of life and how to play it, because, yeah.
So Florence Shin,
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall her middle name now, but she wrote Game of Life, I believe, in 1925.
Yes.
And we just recently I'm not sure the exact date, but just a few weeks ago, the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote, that 19th Amendment was achieved at this time of the month in August.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say, well, I don't actually remember the specific date,
Mm-hmm.
but there was a very pivotal moment in the history of passing the 19th Amendment that occurred in Nashville, Tennessee. And there was quite an effort of women of color, women of all, you might say, cultures and walks of life were challenged to see if they could, in fact, gain, if not equality, at least gain some justice in their lives. But the thing that I'm thinking of is that in your life as a child, when your mother and father separated, I remember you telling me a story of going to the church that your mother attended, and some of the very
Church ladies.
yeah the predominant, seemingly the predominant backbone of the church society,
Right.
they called you aside one day after church,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of interrogated you.
Yes.
They were asking you, what's going on with your mom and dad? We heard your mom has,
Mm-hmm.
your parents are divorcing.
Yes.
And your mother had a very interesting story in that she married your father when she was very young. Was she 16?
16. And I was her second child. She was 19. So I had a teenage mom, more like a sister, really. And then mama.
And your father was how much older than your mother?
I think 5 years.
And in their journey together, how long were they together?
12, 12 years. I was 12 or turning 12 when they divorced. And no, that wouldn't be right. My sister would be illegitimate. Cancel, delete that. 14, I guess 14 years. She got pregnant the first year she was married. So let's say 14 or 15 years. Not sure exact dates.
Well, what I'm thinking about is I talked about this with your mother. That divorce had a major effect on your mother
And me.
and your lives as children.
Mm-hmm.
Your brother and sister would say you all went through a lot due to that divorce.
It was, yes, but it was the era of, that was in the early 60s, 63. There was a turmoil during that era as well, a lot. And then on top of that, my parents divorcing. There was the death of President Kennedy and the war in Vietnam. I had high school friends that did not make it home. So it was
a tumultuous time. Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther
yes,
King,
all of that.
John Kennedy, all those things were happening.
Mm-hmm.
And your mother was a very dignified lady.
Yes.
In fact, I found her to be almost what you might say the epitome of a very beautiful Southern belle. Not the Southern belle that people might think of with any derogatory character traits and such. And I'm smiling now because, I'm Cherokee, I'm Choctaw, Blackfoot, and I'm French Creole, which includes some African
Right.
and European elements. And your mother was very accepting of me.
Totally.
Yes, and I felt that because in my experience in other relationships, I met other people's parents and mothers, and it was always a challenge. It was like that movie, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
Right, exactly.
But you would think a person like your mother, born and raised in, where was she actually born?
Duckville,
Georgia.
Ducktown, Georgia. Yes, we visited there. Mm-hmm.
And she was born in what year?
1931.
So her childhood and adolescence was at a time when there was a lot of changes that we now take for granted that hadn't happened
Exactly.
in society. Mm-hmm. And she could have had her mental outlook about life, and say a person like myself being a person of color coming into her daughter's life could have been seen as a very stormy and something to avoid in life. You could have been told, how dare you do this to me? Society's already looked at me. I'm divorced and I've gone through a lot of judgment, but she really did not ever express anything other than love to me.
No, and she privately would say to me, honey, Louie's just as peculiar as you are. You're a perfect match, which I agree. But one of my fondest memories after you met my Southern Belle, Scarlett O'Hara type mother, was when she woke up, when she would stay with us, but closer to her passing, I would keep her, and then my sister would keep her a while, etc. And she would open her eyes, and you would say, "Good morning, beautiful," and she would look up at you and say, "Good morning, handsome." And that's how you started every morning with my mother. At the last of her life, we got to be with her when she crossed. And all that she feared people would think me crazy, thankfully, we got there to hear her, see her, my stepfather, her true soulmate. And he came to get her. And she told me about her deceased sister, my aunt. giving her a black pantsuit that she was wearing because GB was taking her on a trip far away. And when I asked her when she would return to consciousness, where was GB taking her? She didn't know, but she was excited to see him.
Well, what struck me as being really beautiful about your mother's life was that she married young, she had 3 children very young, and unfortunately, or perhaps in the destiny of everyone's soul seizing, everybody's soul involved in this collective co-creative endeavor we call life,
Right.
everyone was getting their fair share of what was meant to be. And what was meant to be for your mother was that she remained single for how long?
10 years. She said she couldn't marry again because it would be a sin in the eyes of the church. But when my stepfather entered the picture, his wife died, and she had a very long illness. And he was an ex-neighbor of ours when I was real little, about 4 or 5. And he fell in love with her then, and he loved her till his last breath. He thought she was the most beautiful woman. I'm about to cry on earth. He's present. Their love is present because they were true soulmates. And she would tell him off and on, now, in the eyes of the church, you're sinning if you marry me. And he said, I could care less. I love you. So there was a lot of religious dogma that I saw was not what, when I had visions and dreams of Mama Mary and my cosmic Christ, I call him, because he long ago told me to take him out of his sandals in the desert and poverty. He was cosmic. And so when I talk to people or quote scripture, please know it's a tool, a spiritual tool that comes from my raising and also my belief that that's what it should be, not to scold people like my grandmother loved to do, and no, right, and no converting anyone, just love. And I want, that's the message. I'm reading my book. I don't want to sell this book. I want it to be a gift to all. I wanted it read as a gift to all because I want us to love no matter how someone else believes, no matter how someone else looks. Louis and I are the same race. We're human, although his children have accused him of being alien. But hey, maybe we got a little alien DNA, both of us. I'm not sure.
Well, I like to focus on the fact of the journey your mother went through. Your father was not loyal to their relationship.
No, and he was, even when I met you, he was not accepting for me to be with someone that didn't look like he wanted them to look. So yeah, there was some juggling going there, but.
Well, that might be true, but I never overtly felt that from him because, when we visited him,
Good.
He had a guitar and he asked me to tune it. And it seemed like the bridge that we crossed in our relationship had a lot to do with music.
Yes, and that is something that will bring people together no matter the differences.
So I love tuning his guitar, and he was a very phenomenal person. That he passed when he was how old? 90?
He passed when he was 90. He bowled and golfed. He was a sportsman. He bowled and golfed every week of his life, unless he was in the hospital.
But he gardened.
And he a garden. Oh yes.
The land, even in his 90.
Yes.
90 years old.
Yes, he did, and he came home from bowling. He watched the Lady Vols win a basketball game. He went to bed and he just went to sleep. He never woke.
What a beautiful way.
It was a beautiful way, yes. And he came to me within a couple of months in spirit, and I was able to communicate with him. And his message was it sounds so ordinary and it sounds so not a big deal, but he said, I'm proud of all my children. And that just was so sweet.
which for him was saying a lot, because
Yes.
in the consequences of his life with your mother, he did have an affair.
And had a
And
daughter.
he had a child out of
Wedlock. Yes.
while he was married to your mother.
Yes.
And he kept that secret.
Yes, he did.
Until
Ashamed.
someone saw this person who was really your half sister,
Right.
and commented on how she resembled someone else in your family.
Right.
And is that what prompted your father to confess and say, well?
It was a little bit. DNA was insisted on by my beloved half sister, and so he resisted a bit at first, but then once he accepted that the cat was out of the bag, it was a wonderful way for me to even get closer to my half sister, and she was actually born a year before my brother. With my mother had 3 children, and the last of which was my brother, and so there was a lot of hurt that had to be overcome, but thankfully,
through the power of love,
and forgiveness, all of that has come to be just nothing but a blessing in my life.
Which further accentuates how the garden of a desert rose can really blossom and bloom.
Exactly.
In someone's life. And I'll try to make this short in closing this discussion about this chapter, chapter 2. Your mother, as you said, had been a neighbor with the man that would eventually become her second husband.
Yes.
And he married, and your mother married.
No, they were both married.
No, they married separately. He married a woman and was married for a number of years.
Oh, many years.
Your mother married and went 12 years or so.
10 single.
And divorced and stayed single.
Yes.
And she was available and single when GB's wife passed.
Yes.
And he called your mother up.
Yes.
And he expressed his, I guess he expressed his love for her, or at least his attraction, desire for her. And he spoke of seeing her in the garden as neighbors years before.
Yeah.
And
yes.
it
And
never left
it stole his heart. And you know, when he asked her out, his only other wife, his first wife, mother of 3, her medical expenses and her funeral had cost every dime he had. He had very little, but he wanted to have a date with my mother. And I have to share this. It's so funny. When he called my mother, she hung up the phone and she turned around and said, "Oh, dear Lord, that man's wife is not cold in the grave, and he's asking me out." And I was like, "Well, Mother, Dad is dead. It's okay." So she went out, and as she told you about
they shared a soda
because
and GB didn't have a lot of money.
That all he had in his pocket.
Enough money for them to split one soda. They got 1 soda and 2 straws. And how romantic can that be?
I know. And on the second date, Mother wanted to buy some fingernail polish. They had stopped, and so she picked out a color, and he said, "I'll pay for that." And he threw a quarter on the counter. And Mother got so tickled. She said, "Honey, polish hasn't cost a quarter since before the war," Second World War, which he was in. And they had a lot of fun years together.
So the moral of that love story is that things may not work out in your first,
second,
or who knows how many marriages
right,
before you meet that someone.
That someone like I have.
Someone can come unexpectedly,
right,
out of the blue, as a gift of spirit to all those that can see their way through the dark nights of the soul that make you feel like you just can't take anymore.
Now, my book is written about the era of my life at 32. Louis and I didn't meet till we were 30 years later, in our 60s. And it's never too late. It's never, I don't care what age you are. I don't care what your history is. You know, it's work on yourself, become whole. Louis and I didn't want partners when we met because we felt whole and complete within ourselves. And that's exactly what our magnetic energy brought us together. And all those who have eyes to see with their single eye have called us twin flames, cosmic couple. I'm not sure any of the other things. Crazy, maybe. But anyway.
But that's taken as a compliment.
That's right. we work toward that.
So our next chapter, chapter 3, will be continued after this. And that chapter is entitled Nature's Clues. So thank you for listening, and we hope that you will continue to join us on this journey through the garden of a desert rose.
Namaste.
Blessings. Well, that's it for here and now. But until we meet again, this has been Louis Marie Blanche thanking you for listening to Conversations with Elders on Glastonbury Radio 432. Bless you.
Quantum physics in the kitchen sink, the energy that follows the thoughts you think. Quantum physics and the cosmic sea, laws of nature too heavy for me. It's too cosmic, much too cosmic for me.